During the era of Salahuddin Ayyubi, the great Mujahid of Islam and the guardian of Islamic values, Islam faced more conspiracies than in any other period. The Crusaders and Jews, after failing to defeat Salahuddin Ayyubi and Nuruddin Zangi on the battlefield, used wealth and sent well-trained young and beautiful women to infiltrate and destabilize Muslim leaders and military commanders. They realized that defeating Salahuddin in combat was not easy, as the Sultan was a fierce warrior. Even the military power of the Crusaders proved insufficient against him. In the Islamic Sultanate, especially in Egypt, where Salahuddin had established strong military and administrative control, the Crusaders increased their espionage activities. They extensively used wealth and women to create traitors within Salahuddin's high command and administrative ranks. They exploited the weaknesses of greedy and unfaithful individuals. As a result, Salahuddin was forced to fight not only on the battlefield, but also against these covert threats. Many stories of these battles reached us, but no detailed account of the espionage war has been preserved. These battles involved spies, trained women, and assassins of the Hashashin sect, led by Hassan bin Sabba, who were also known as Fidai. Salahuddin Ayyubi faced assassination attempts several times by these professional killers. However, by the grace of Allah and his own bravery, he survived. The conspiracies of these assassins and the ensuing battles created many stories, which we now narrate. Salahuddin's struggles highlight that warfare is a dangerous game, especially when compounded by the lures of women and alcohol. Find solace in the company of birds. Warfare is a dangerous game for a man who is enamored with women and wine. These words were written in 1175 AD by Salahuddin Ayyubi to Saifuddin, one of commanders of his cousin, Caliph al-Saleh. The two had conspired against Salahuddin by secretly aiding the Crusaders, enticing them with wealth and treasures, and plotting his defeat. The Crusaders launched their attack with the support of al-Saleh and Saifuddin. However, Salahuddin Ayyubi defeated them all. Saifuddin abandoned his position and fled, leaving behind luxuries like colorful birds, young dancers, singers, and barrels of wine. Salahuddin freed the dancers and singers and sent a letter to Saifuddin with these words: "You both attempted to erase my existence by supporting the infidels, but don't think that your conspiracy could ever wipe out the existence of the Islamic world. If you were jealous of me, you could have had me killed. You have already orchestrated 2 assassination attempts against me, both of which failed. Now try once more. Perhaps this time you might succeed. If you truly convince me that by killing me, Islam will rise even higher, then I am willing to lay my head before your sword. Swear on Allah, and I shall willingly give up my life for the greater glory of Islam. But remember, your conspiracies will never erase the name and legacy of Islam. I want to emphasize that no non-Muslim can truly be a friend of a Muslim. History is evident. Look into your past and reflect on this yourself. People like King of Frank and Raymond, who were enemies of Islam, became your friends only to use you against other Muslims. If they had succeeded, their next target would have been you. After this, Islam itself would have been erased. Remember, you are members of a warrior nation. The art of warfare is your profession. Every Muslim is a soldier of Allah, but faith and character are the fundamental requirements. Find joy in things like watching birds, and remember that being a soldier is dangerous for someone who is drawn to the temptations of women and alcohol. I request you to cooperate with me and join me in jihad. If you cannot do this, then stay out of my path. I will not punish you, and may Allah forgive your sins. A European historian, Len Paul, writes that the spoils of war captured by Salahuddin Ayyubi were beyond measure, and the number of war captives was equally uncountable. Salahuddin divided all the spoils into 3 parts. One portion was distributed among the captives, who were then set free. The second portion was shared among the soldiers and the poor. The third portion was given to the Nizam-ul-Mulk Madrasa, where Salahuddin himself had studied. He kept nothing for himself and gave nothing to any of his generals. As a result, the war captives, some of whom were Muslims, joined Salahuddin Ayyubi's camp after being freed. They accepted his leadership and offered their services to his army. Salahuddin's generosity and greatness became renowned far and wide. Before this, the Hashashin sect led by Hassan bin Sabbah, whom European historians called assassins, had attempted to assassinate Salahuddin Ayyubi twice. However, by God's grace, this great Mujahid of Islam survived both attempts. The third attempt occurred after Salahuddin had shattered the conspiracies of both Muslims and Crusaders with his sword. Amir Saifuddin Salahuddin Ayyubi. He sought the support of Hassan bin Sabbah's assassin sect. This sect had long been thriving within the folds of Islam like a hidden serpent. A detailed account of this group is extensive, but in brief, just as the earth, after separating from the sun, became a cradle of sin, similarly, a man named Hassan bin Sabbah broke away from Islam and devised a plan to claim the stature of prophets and messengers. He continued to call himself a Muslim and formed a group that used mystical methods to win followers. For this purpose, the group employed exceptionally beautiful women, intoxicating herbs, hypnotism, and persuasive speech. They created a paradise where even the hardest hearts would soften. To eliminate opponents, they trained a network of assassins skilled in secret and mysterious techniques. These individuals were incredibly cunning, intelligent, and fearless. They would infiltrate as bodyguards for prominent generals by changing their appearance and speech. When someone was mysteriously killed, there was no trace of the assassins. They specialized in political assassinations and often used poison delivered by beautiful women in wine. For a long time, this group was used exclusively for such purposes. Its followers were called Fidayin or Hashishin, a term from which the modern English word assassin is derived. Salahuddin Ayyubi, however, was immune to their temptations. He despised both beautiful women and alcohol. The only way to harm him was through direct assassination attempts, but his loyal guards thwarted two such attacks. Now, when Salahuddin Ayyubi expected that his cousin Al-Salih and Amir Saifuddin, having faced defeat, would have repented, they instead plotted another underground attempt at revenge. Salahuddin continued his campaigns instead of celebrating his victories, capturing 3 key forts, including the famous town of Gaza. One afternoon, while resting in his tent, wearing his battlefield turban for protection against the sun and enemy swords, Salahuddin was guarded by vigilant bodyguards outside his tent. However, the commander of his guards briefly left. A guard noticed Salahuddin lying on his back with his eyes closed, resting peacefully. Looking towards the bodyguards, he saw 3 or 4 of them distracted. The guard looked at him, closed his eyes, and nodded 3 times. The guards alerted others, but one of them quietly left, drew a dagger from his waistband, and stealthily approached Salahuddin Ayyubi like a leopard pouncing on its prey. The dagger-wielding hand rose, but at that moment, Salahuddin Ayyubi turned slightly in his sleep. It's uncertain whether the attacker intended to strike his heart or his chest, but the dagger only managed to graze the upper portion of Salahuddin's turban, barely missing his head. The turban fell off, but Salahuddin sprang up with lightning speed. He didn't waste a moment figuring out what was happening. He had already experienced 2 assassination attempts before, so he wasn't surprised that the attacker was disguised in the uniform of his own bodyguards, a uniform Salahuddin himself had selected. Without hesitation, Salahuddin reacted as the attacker attempted to retrieve the dagger from the turban. With his head uncovered, Salahuddin delivered a powerful punch to the attacker's chin, and the sound of a bone cracking was heard. The attacker's jaw was broken, and he fell back, letting out a horrifying scream. The dagger remained stuck in the turban, while Salahuddin pulled out his own weapon. By this time, two guards rushed inside with swords drawn. Salahuddin ordered them to capture the attacker alive. However, a chaotic fight erupted among the guards themselves as Salahuddin fought off the attacker with a dagger against two swords. This intense confrontation lasted only a minute or two before all the guards stormed inside. Salahuddin was shocked to see that his bodyguards were divided into two factions, violently fighting each other. He couldn't tell who was friend or foe, and thus refrained from intervening. Eventually, when several guards were killed, some fled, and others were critically injured. The situation began to clear up. It was revealed that 7 of Salahuddin's guards, assigned to protect him, were actually infiltrators sent to assassinate him. The group had initially sent only one assassin for the job. The circumstances inside the tent had now completely changed. Salahuddin, regaining composure, placed his sword's tip on the attacker's throat and asked who had sent him. He promised the attacker his life in exchange for the truth. The attacker confessed that he was an infiltrator sent by Montgisard. Montgisard was the governor of one of al-Salih's fortresses. The saga began on March 23, 1169, when Salahuddin Ayyubi was appointed as the viceroy and military commander of Egypt. He earned this prestigious position not only because of his noble lineage, but also due to his exceptional expertise in warfare from an early age. He was not just a ruler, but a protector of Islam and a champion of his people's dignity and prosperity. When he rose to prominence, Salahuddin realized a grave truth. Muslim rulers of the time lacked unity and often relied on the assistance of others. Many had succumbed to indulgent lifestyles, with alcohol and women distracting them from their duties. Their palaces were filled with non-Muslim women, often Jews or Christians, who had been brought in for their extraordinary beauty and charm. These women, who were strategically placed in these harems, acted like termites, eroding the character and resolve of the rulers and their generals. This moral decay allowed the Crusaders, particularly the Franks, to gradually seize territories of the Muslim empires. Muslim rulers paid annual taxes or tributes to the Crusaders, essentially accepting their dominance. The Crusaders would regularly launch attacks, capturing small areas and imposing taxes. Their ultimate goal was to completely dismantle Islam and establish their dominance in the Muslim world. Meanwhile, Muslim rulers were too consumed with indulgence and internal conflicts to effectively resist this threat. They kept paying taxes with the hope that they would not be disturbed in their luxuries. Even cemeteries were sold out during this time. Among them, the most dangerous sect emerged, a group of fanatics that called themselves Fidai. Later, they became famously known as the Assassins because they used a drug called hashish to recruit others into their faction. Salahuddin Ayyubi, received his education at the Nizamiya system established by Nizam-ul-Mulk, a prominent vizier of the Islamic world. These schools aim to provide Islamic education and instill Islamic values and culture in children. According to historian Ibn al-Athar, Nizam-ul-Mulk was the first notable victim of the assassins, as he stood as a barrier to the expansionist ambitions of the Crusaders. In 1091, he was assassinated by the assassins, orchestrated by the Crusaders. Saladin was educated in this system and absorbed a deep sense of military discipline from his elders. Nur ad-Din Zangi instilled in him the values of military strategy and diplomacy. nurturing a zeal that would later make him a formidable force against the Crusaders. In his youth, Saladin displayed intelligence and qualities essential for a great commander. He mastered military tactics, intelligence gathering, commando operations, and guerrilla warfare, and recognized that the Crusaders had surpassed the Muslims in espionage and ideological warfare. Saladin wanted to fight on the ideological battlefield, where swords were not the primary weapon. As the story unfolds, you'll see how his sword became a weapon of profound impact, and his love for the cause became a force stronger than any sword. Patience and resilience, which he cultivated in his youth, were his greatest assets. When Saladin was appointed as the viceroy and commander-in-chief of Egypt, many senior officers opposed him. In their view, Saladin was young and inexperienced. However, when they met him and heard him speak, their objections subsided. According to historian Len Paul, Saladin was extremely disciplined. He outlawed indulgence and luxury for himself and his army, and dedicated all his mental and physical energy to restoring the caliphate and driving the Crusaders out of Palestine. He declared that reclaiming Palestine was his ultimate goal and instructed his forces accordingly. Upon arriving in Egypt, he faced not just the Crusaders, but also opposition from his fellow Muslims. Many Muslim leaders had become complacent, engaging in excessive indulgence and losing the will to fight. Saladin noticed the beauty and allure that surrounded some of these leaders, which was more dangerous than the Crusaders' strength. When Saladin arrived in Egypt, he was welcomed with great enthusiasm. Among those greeting him was a general named Naji, a skilled and influential leader. Saladin observed everyone closely, with a smile on his face and words of love and kindness on his tongue. However, some senior officers viewed him with skepticism, seeing him merely as a young successor of his family's lineage. A senior officer whispered to another, "He's just a child, we'll train him." It is not clear whether Saladin sensed the skepticism in their eyes, but those welcoming him saw him as inexperienced. When Saladin stopped to greet Naji, his demeanor changed slightly. Naji, though of Saladin's father's age, first bowed deeply before him, then embraced him warmly, saying, "Every drop of my blood will be spilled to protect your life. You are the trust of our battles." Saladin replied with a firm grip on Naji's hand, "My life is not more valuable than the cause of Islam. Protect every drop of your blood for the fight against the Crusaders." Naji smiled in response, as though Saladin had told a joke. However, Saladin may not have fully grasped the meaning behind Naji's experienced smile. Naji was opposed to the Fatimid Caliphate and was the commander of Egypt's bodyguards, a force of 50,000 soldiers. These soldiers were heavily armed and deeply loyal to Naji, making him an unofficial king. During Saladin's time, conspiracies and fanatic sects were widespread. The central unity of the Islamic world was broken, and the Crusaders were making progress with their enticing diplomacy and strategies. It was an era of opportunism and rivalry, where anyone with even a bit of power sought to establish their dominance. He used it to amass more wealth and deployed Sudanese bodyguards. Commander was a source of terror for rulers and other leaders. God had given him a sharp mind. He was referred to as a kingmaker and had unparalleled mastery in building and destroying. When he saw Salahuddin Ayyubi, a certain smile appeared on his face, the kind of smile a wolf has when spotting a weak lamb. For him, the common man held the least value, as he commanded an army of 50,000 bodyguards, and Salahuddin needed his military. Salahuddin Ayyubi was told, "Your Excellency, you have traveled a great distance. "Why not rest first?" He replied, "The turban placed on my head is an honor I was not worthy of. This responsibility has taken away my rest and sleep. Would you kindly take me to the battlefield, where my duties await me under the sky?" His deputy then asked, "Would your excellency not prefer to eat before starting your work?" Salahuddin Ayyubi thought for a moment and followed them. Tall, robust bodyguards stood in two lines in front of the building where a meal was prepared. Upon seeing their impressive arms and discipline, a sense of satisfaction appeared on his face, but it vanished as soon as he entered the doorway. Inside stood young women with graceful figures, adorned in delicate silk, their golden hair shimmering in the light. They held baskets filled with petals and began scattering them in Salahuddin Ayyubi's path, while the sound of drums and flutes filled the air. Seeing the petals, Salahuddin stepped back. Naji and his deputy stood silently beside him, inviting him to proceed. It was a royal gesture, reminiscent of the Mughal emperors in India. Salahuddin said, "I have not come to trample on flower petals," and smiled, a smile rarely seen on his lips. Naji said, "We can bring stars down from the sky for your path, Your Highness." Salahuddin replied, "If you wish to lay something in my path, let it be something that truly pleases my heart." The deputy asked, "What is it that pleases Your Highness?" Salahuddin smiled and said, "The corpses of the Crusaders." But his smile quickly disappeared, and flames seemed to erupt from his eyes. In a subdued but intense voice, he said, "A Muslim's life is not a bed of flowers. Don't you know, the Crusaders are gnawing away at the Islamic Sultanate like rats? Do you know why they are succeeding? Because we have begun walking on petals. We have stripped our daughters and dishonored their dignity. My eyes are on Palestine by scattering flowers in my path. Do you intend to strip Islam of its banner in Egypt as well?" He cast a piercing glance at everyone and then commanded, "Remove these flowers from my path. If I step on them, my soul will be pierced by thorns. Take these women away, lest my sword becomes entangled in their alluring golden hair and rendered useless." Those around him said, "Your Highness, your wish is our command." Salahuddin Ayyubi interrupted them. "Do not call me Your Highness." His tone was sharp, like a sword cutting through the neck of an infidel. He said, "Your Highness is the ones whose creed you follow, and to whom I am a devoted servant. My life is devoted to that noble messenger, whose sacred message I have engraved upon my heart. I have come to Egypt with this message. The Crusaders want to seize this message from me and drown it in the sea of Rome, submerging it in wine. I have not come here to become a king." The young women, under orders, collected the petals and left. Salahuddin Ayyubi quickly stepped inside. There was a grand hall with a long table laden with colorful flowers and roasted lamb pieces. Exotic dishes and fragrant meals were spread all around. Salahuddin stopped and asked his deputy, "Does everyone in this land eat such meals?" The deputy replied, "No, Your Highness. The poor cannot even dream of such food." Salahuddin asked, "Which nation do you belong to? Are the people who cannot dream of such food from a different nation?" Without waiting for an answer, he said, "Call all the staff and soldiers on duty here and let them have this meal." He quickly picked up a piece of bread, placed some roasted meat on it, and ate while standing. After finishing, he drank water and went into a room with his commander to discuss further matters. 2 hours later, the commander Naji left, mounted his horse, and rode off, disappearing from sight. At night, in Naji's private chamber, 2 commanders, his close confidants, were drinking wine with him.